afternoon, and it is indeed Friday afternoon. Welcome to The Road to Recovery, The Road to Freedom with Mark. It is good to be back, finally back, and it's been a struggle for us all. It's been a very trying time, and I found it very, very frustrating myself. I guess I should be running around crowing at the top of my voice, I told you so, I told you so, I told you so. For about the last 4-5 years, I have been warning everyone I can about an outbreak, a pandemic hitting this country. Now, I had never heard of coronavirus because it is just one of thousands of potential evildoers. I was looking more at El Toro, which is in South America, Asia, Eastern Europe, and South America. It's been going for, 51 years now unabated. It has killed millions and millions. I think over 4.5 million people have died from El Toro. It is incurable. And it is very, very nasty. It is fatal. And this is the one I thought was going to strike us. I have been warning people for as long as I can to swat up, to be aware, to know what to do, and not one single person paid a blind bit of attention to me. And now look what happened. The government, unfortunately, was not prepared. We were not prepared, not even in the slightest. This was borne out by the fact that everybody went nutso and cleaned the supermarkets out of toilet paper, of all things. The one thing that we could probably live without, but what it did was ensue a sense of panic in everybody, and that panic only got worse. I could see it in people's eyes, the way they avoided me as if I was a leper, and I thought, man, oh man, if this was the Black Plague and 1/3 of our population dropped dead, do you think for a moment that our society would survive? It would not. It could not. It would be impossible. We would be ploughing piles of corpses into mass graves with bulldozers now. Just imagine how the country would be. I think that this is an opportunity for us to realise that this was a warning and that we should get prepared. What will happen? Everyone will pretend that it's over now and forever, and they'll try and put it behind them and forget about it. So, what do I do to get it through to you? I don't know how. Do I have to hammer my head against a brick wall for the next 5 years? I hope not. First things first, my friends, buy a sack of rice. Okay, really simple. 5 kilo sack of rice in a plastic bag. Put it away where rats and mice can't get to it. Make sure it's in a good solid box. Why? Well, because that's 100 meals. And should everything fall apart, should this come again and everything turns to custard, you want to make sure you've got enough food, because if our transportation networks break down and the supermarkets break down, and believe you me, they were mighty close, they were stretched. We are very, 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 very lucky we live in a country that produces way more than enough food. We live in an empty country, isolated from the rest of the world. The government did what it had to do, and there have been some criticisms, but on the whole, they did what they had to do to ensure that we stayed safe and that the country wasn't destroyed, the economy didn't collapse. So, although I don't applaud them, how could I ever possibly applaud them when they were so inept initially, slow to react, unprepared, and not just for an outbreak of a virus. We are not prepared for earthquakes, which, my friends, are imminent. And it is going to happen. It is going to happen. We are going to have a devastating earthquake very soon. Another Christchurch or Kaikoura earthquake. It is going to happen. It is an absolute inevitability. We have tens of thousands of earthquakes a year, but we don't feel most of them because the tectonic plates grind slowly. Unfortunately, the Pacific plate is very soft and it's grinding under the Australasian plate, subducting very nastily. And what that means for us we're going to get hell of an earthquakes in the future. There have been some massive ones in the past, and we are utterly unprepared for that, or a tsunami. Cast your mind back to Banda Aceh and what happened to those poor people up in Indonesia, and not just there, Thailand too. They got absolutely devastated, and the ability for a country to pull back from the brink, the ability for someone to hospitalise people, is woefully inadequate. What we need is not just greater capacity in our existing hospitals, but we need buildings that are to be kept empty or working in a business that can be cleared out very quickly so they can be converted into hospitals where we can take in 50 to 100,000 people immediately. And we have people who can do the job, people who are at least trained a good part of the way. All of the people at St. John's, everyone who's done a current first aid course needs to be registered so that they can put their shoulders behind the civil defence. The civil defence needs to be way better organised, way bigger, better funded, more prepared. We need tsunami warnings set out all around the country. They have them all over the world, but we need more of them so that we can have as much warning as possible and limit the number of deaths initially from a massive tsunami, which, by the way, is very likely to come as well if you look at how we lie in the seabed and how that ring of fire runs all the way up through the Kermadex. Boy, oh boy, oh boy, are we vulnerable and are we unprepared. I'd also like to say it is very wrong, very destructive, and very bloody stupid to make statements like suicides are increasing when you have no evidence whatsoever and it turns out to be false news. For the love of God, don't indulge in these things, because what happens is we get copycat suicides and we get packed suicides. So one can trigger another and another and another. For very vulnerable people in a time like this, it's extraordinarily difficult, but it is something that they are used to and able to cope with. I would say on the whole that the community has done a great job. People have been far more kind and considerate than ever before, and this is the other thing I've been cracking on about all of the time. You must show kindness and consideration towards others. It is imperative that you do so. Not only does it mean it's a nicer world to live in, but it means we're far more willing to cooperate with each other, and cooperation is absolutely essential. Whether you like the rules or not, you have to follow them. I don't like them, but I followed them to the letter. I isolated as much as I could. All it takes is a few dozen people breaking the rules, and it's all for now. Right, that's my little bit. I hope you're prepared. Go out and buy some rice. Also stockpile some other food if you possibly can. What I do is I tend to spend about $2 to $3 a week just buying like dried food, soup mixes, rice, tins of spaghetti, stuff that I know is going to last me. Not only do I have the security of knowing that I have that food source, I also have the security of knowing should something go wrong, I can survive months at home without having to worry too much about starving to death. So, be prepared, people. Get prepared. Get your family, your whānau prepared. Get everyone around you as best you can. Right, time's rocking on, and I don't just talk about depression and mental health. I've got some wonderful stories I've written, and I'm going to read you one now, which is called Gallipoli in Istanbul. I went over to Turkey and Greece for 6 months, many, many, many years ago when I was in my 20s, and as you can tell, it was a long time ago. I had a wonderful time. I travelled the world for just over 7 years. I spent 2 years in Africa and 5 years in Europe, travelling right across the continent. I did 5 different trips all around, from Spain and Portugal right up to the north, and Belgium and Holland, and way, 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 way across when it was still the Eastern Bloc. So it was a very different country back then when Russia was still in control of large swathes of Europe. And it was a very interesting place. Not that many people had been there. It was not a popular thing to go to Gallipoli way back in the 1980s. And that just made it even more special. So this is Gallipoli in Istanbul. My good friend Wayne and I had hitchhiked our way round from the Aegean coast from Greece to Turkey. We first headed down to the small town of Kanakli, which is near the beach we refer to as Gallipoli. We met up with a guy called David who ran his home as a hostel for travellers, especially Kiwis and Aussies. David was a fantastic host and arranged a cheap taxi trip over the hill to where the great battle for Chunuk Bair occurred. Wayne and I did not know what to expect, so we were amazed to find the place left pretty much unchanged from those terrible days when so many young men had perished. There was a small museum temporarily manned by an old geezer, some well-tended graves at the top of the hill, and a large stone plaque from the term of President Ataturk. In the most respectful terms, it is written there for all to see. Those heroes that shed their blood and lost their lives, you are now lying in the soil of a friendly country, therefore rest in peace. There is no difference between the Johnnies and the Mehmets to us where they lay side by side here in this country of ours. You, the mothers who sent your sons from faraway countries, wipe away your tears. Your sons are now lying in our bosom and are in peace. After having lost their lives on this land, they have become our sons as well. President Ataturk, 1934. Apart from this plaque, the graves and museum, very little had changed from those terrible days when the abortive landings had taken place. Down on the beach there were thousands of corroded shell casings and bullets lying everywhere. Many of these have been taken as souvenirs by tourists and are quickly disappearing as a result. Up from the beach was an area called the Pines, where many Australian boys had been slaughtered both by friendly fire and the fierce resistance the Turks had showed. At the time, a simple unsealed road leading up the hills of Chunuk Bair, where the Indians and Kiwis had been decimated. There were open trenches all over the place. Undisturbed from the time those poor boys had fallen, the trenches were full of skull, leg and arm bones protruding from the earth. As the land grew steeper, the number of bones increased and tears flowed freely as I touched them. Despite the incredibly steep and exposed terrain, the Kiwis managed to force the Turks off the top, were forced back, then took it a second time, only to be hurled off again, before a truce being declared. I did not believe in ghosts until that day, but the eerie emptiness of this open graveyard moved me as never before. After spending the best part of a day at Gallipoli, we headed back for tea at Kanakli, where through David I met up with one of the last Turkish survivors of the campaign. He heaped praise on his old enemies for their fierceness and tenacity, especially the Kiwis. He told me of the extreme hardships they all had to endure, freezing winter and blistering summer, and trenches so close they could hear each other talking. It was quite overwhelming to hear of his hardships, and humbling to hear the great respect he held for his old enemy. After a very pleasant and moving stay at Kanakli, we headed back up the peninsula and eastward on to Istanbul. This magnificent city on the Golden Horn is split in half by the Bosphorus Strait. On one side lies the new part of the city, with its high-rise buildings and Western trappings like McDonald's. Fittingly enough, it is on the Western Bank and emphasises Turkey's wish to join the European Union. The Eastern Bank, however, is the Byzantium and Constantinople of old. It retains some of the old Topkapi Palace walls from the Ottomans. Also the magnificent St. Sophia's Byzantium period church. Erected at the height of the Byzantium period, it boasted the largest dome of any church for over 1,000 years. Below St. Sophia's, towards the banks, the dilapidated old buildings lean on each other like drunks. We stayed on the rooftop of one of these dodgy old places, directly below the Blue Mosque, which sits in magnificence further up the hill. I walked up from our dodgy lodgings to St. Sophia's and spent a few hours in its pleasant cool on a blistering hot day. From there I walked up to a quadrant outside the incredible Blue Mosque, with its 6 gigantic minarets. Its overall size is hard to take in. Entering a Blue Mosque, having first washed hands and feet in the cool water and covering from wrist to ankle, is a religious experience in itself. The eye is drawn to the heavens by the untold thousands of beautiful handmade turquoise tiles. The bright light of God, the epicentre. It was impossible to take it all in with just one glance. I found myself bowing my head naturally in order to take in the magnificence of this labour of love. The sheer scale only added to the potency of its message. The peace and serenity of this cool sanctuary was most welcome on a hot afternoon. Outside is a quadrant which houses one of Cleopatra's needles taken from Egypt during the height of empire. The others are located on the Champs-Élysées in Paris, the Embankment on the Thames in London, and the Washington Monument in the United States. Strange how the symbols of power are reused by the next great power. These so-called needles are huge obelisks of stone, tapering from bottom to top and finished to a point at the top. Beautiful and huge in their own right, they are symbols of ancient power which are enhanced by their new surroundings, especially in Istanbul. At night there was a sound and light show outside the Blue Mosque, which lit up like a castle from ancient times. This spectacular show transported the crowd back in time, to a time when great sultans ruled over this magnificent city and brought light and civilization into an otherwise dark world. The mighty Ottoman Empire slowly ground to a halt, finally collapsing in the 1920s and being polished off by the Nazis. After the show, I headed back to our accommodation and got off to sleep with the help of a local hooch called Raki. At first light in the morning, the calling to prayer broke out across the old city via speakers on the minarets of the mosques. Haunting and beautiful, it is an experience that stays with you for a lifetime. In the cool air and the beautiful light of the morning, I walked up the hill to Topkapi Museum. Housed in the ruins of the castle, it houses many priceless works of art and precious gems. Amongst these is the Topkapi diamond, a huge and beautiful stone that defies belief. Not as large as the Cullinan diamond used in the crown jewels, it nonetheless has an otherworldly clarity to it. It reflects and refracts the light so well it almost seems liquid. Also housed there are emeralds the size of dinner plates. Just a tiny fraction of the Sultan's treasures remain. Yet what remains is such a beautiful and impressive collection it only sparks the imagination. There is also a collection of Ming Dynasty pottery so huge the senses begin to blur on looking at it. Reminiscent of the tales of the Arabian Nights, I could easily imagine a great castle on the hill full of great piles of treasure. By the very nature of the development of the city, it is impossible to rebuild what has fallen into disrepair. The ruins, however, only enhance the beauty and mystique of the old city. I left Topkapi Palace in the heat of the afternoon and headed down a street called Divan Yol seeking shade. I came across a smoking cafe where the locals in their traditional loose clothes sat to while away a hot afternoon. The idea of this cafe was that you purchase a huge stub of tobacco for 100 or so lira, which was next to nothing. You are then waited upon by waiters who carry around hot coals on a plate. These are placed on the stub, and put in a huge water pipe. These beautiful hookah pipes, as they are called, have a number of hoses and mouthpieces coming from them so the experience can be shared amongst friends. They also serve hot sweet tea called simply chai. It comes with no milk. Instead, they serve water with the tea. The cafe itself is an open courtyard, protected from the sun by high walls. The tables, chairs and floors are solid granite, and it is refreshingly cool. Old men sit around with friends, chatting and puffing on their pipes. As I watch them, I am transcended in time, and imagine the same scene, having played itself out for centuries. Even sitting on my own, smoking and watching, was an extremely pleasant way to spend an afternoon. Despite the language barrier, I felt quite accepted. The combination of tea and good tobacco was quite intoxicating. I waited until the burning sun had stooped quite low before wandering down some narrow cobblestone streets. Old men sat on stools at short tables, drinking tea and playing backgammon. Since I had already played the game, I asked an old guy for a game. The language barrier can be overcome with hand signals and a few words. Before long I was being thrashed, but I stuck at it until I could hold my own at the breakneck speed. Backgammon is like a national pastime for men, and we played many enjoyable games, some of which I won. We played well into dark that night, and I felt like I had travelled in time, as this time-honoured tradition played itself out. With my first real lesson in backgammon, I headed back down the hill to my rooftop bed. It was only possible to sleep during the small hours. Over the next few days, Wayne and I moved to cheaper accommodation, which required a cheap bus ride just out from the old city centre. We visited other great mosques like Suleiman the Magnificent's around the Golden Horn. We also went to local markets with their exotic foods and spices. The Turks are natural salesmen and always drive a hard bargain. Centuries of trading on the Silk Route seems to have honed their skills, making trading with them great fun. Despite obvious poverty, the city vibrantly bustles with trade. Handmade carpets are a favourite item with the Turks, and they go to great lengths to sell these works of art. The hot summer days of visiting mosques and markets, of smoking hookah pipes and nights of backgammon passed too quickly. Soon we were off south, down the coast, but the indelible impression of Istanbul stayed with us for the rest of our lives. The end. Well, I hope you enjoyed that little story. As I was reading that, I remember going to this little town called Kaş on the south coast of Turkey, right on the very south coast, and very interesting place. It's just down on the bottom of the Aegean, and I remember this young lad, too young to shave himself, 10 years old, gave me a shave with a cutthroat razor. He had to practice on balloons because he wasn't old enough to shave himself. And his granddad said, "Oh, he'll be good, he won't cut your throat." And sure enough, that young lad of 10 gave me the best cutthroat razor shave I have ever had. And it was very nice to be clean. And, you know, in hot, dusty countries like that, especially down the south, it's very, very hot and dusty, and even up towards Ankara, it's mighty hard going. And the funny old thing is the different cultures, you know, you see a lot of people standing around eating cucumbers, and you just think, dear Lord, that's odd. Everyone peeling and munching on cucumbers, but the thing about them is they're full of water and they're cool, they're very, very nice, and they're not too heavy on your stomach. And it's just those funny little cultural differences that really blew me away. I mean, you just imagine people standing around bus stops here in New Zealand munching on cucumbers. I just can't see it. So, you see these funny little things that you remember forever. I mean, I guess it's not that big a deal, but it's just one of those things. And a hot country like that, they grow watermelons, apricots, tobacco, wonderful food. But I had next to no money, and I was starving. I spent 6 months on the road living on the equivalent of $2 a day. And believe you me, $2 for food, accommodation, transport. She's mighty tough going. And I just want to say a massive thanks to everyone in Turkey. I know many of you will be dead by now, but any of those people out there who helped me, I really do appreciate what you did for me. And it was just magnificent. The Muslims won me over. They showed me what wonderful people they really are, how kind they are towards poor people, how godly they are. They're true believers, and they live the Ten Commandments. They are very, very good people, and it's just a damn shame that in Persia or Iran and places like that, Iraq, which is just south of Turkey, and in Syria, they have had such terrible problems and suffering. I feel so for the citizens, for the women, the children, the innocent people who suffer so badly from war. Oh, I hope and I pray someday in my lifetime they can come to some kind of resolution and stop the bombings and the killings, because it breaks my heart to see that happen out that way. It's such wonderful places, such magnificent history. Right, well, it's time for me to pack in for another day. It's been great doing the show, and I'm amazed I've managed to stick to time. I thought I might be a bit rusty by now, but no, we're all good to go. So I just want to finish off by saying, from the coronavirus, take this. Take the memory of how kind we were to each other, how good and considerate we were to each other, and keep that going. Turn this country into a better place. Turn this into a win from here. Be more kind, be more considerate. Just common courtesy. Please and thank you go a long, 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 long way in my world. I try and show kindness and consideration towards others. Now, I am, for the most part, an angry and offensive person, and that's because people annoy the hell out of me when they're nasty, and I'm doubly nasty in return. But I will always try to be kind to someone first. I will always make that effort and initiate, and that is the important thing. And when you say thank you to someone, don't just say thank you as you're walking out a door. Look them in the eyes, say it and mean it, and boy, what a difference it makes to this country. And please use crossings. They're there for a reason. I don't want to run you over. If you're 10 feet away from a crossing, please use it. Okay, that's it for this week. And I'm going to keep banging on about being prepared. There will be other dramatic things happen. If you cast your mind back over the last 20 years, those mosque killings of my brothers and sisters, the Kaikoura, Christchurch earthquakes, the COVID-19, mate, you've just got to learn to roll with the punches. Don't panic. Support each other and be kind to each other, and I will see you again next week. Please tell everybody you know about my show. Please get involved in community shows like this, because they are here by people like me who otherwise wouldn't get a voice, for people like you in my community. Thank you very much to Michael and Veronica at Arrow Radio. This is a not-for-profit organisation that sure could do with your support, financial or otherwise. Any support you can give us will be greatly appreciated. Thank you so much to Wairarapa TV for all the great sponsors that support this radio station, the TV station. I hope we keep rocking for years to come. Bye for now, and kia maia, kia kaha. Thank you, my friends, and we'll see you next week. Bye for now.